Welcome back to the programme. A reminder of our top story this hour. Russia and Ukraine have agreed to a ceasefire to allow civilians safe passage out of several cities. But this comes as Moscow claims it is investigating evidence of biological weapons in Ukraine.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has wrapped up his Baltic states reassurance tour with a separate debrief at the Elysee Palace. The main topic with both France's Foreign Minister and President Emmanuel Macron was a review of the diplomatic efforts underway to diminish the violence and bring the Kremlin's war to a halt. Earlier, Macron had held an unprecedented three-way video conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Chinese President Xi Jinping in a bid to prise apart Beijing and Moscow. Xi had called for restraint and expressed support for the attempts by France and Germany to achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine and to guarantee that the civilian population there has access to humanitarian aid. Blinken's tour has taken him mainly to NATO member countries located in Eastern Europe, specifically Poland and the Baltic republics, in a mission to affirm the military alliance's support.
As I said yesterday, in Lithuania and in Latvia, the people of Estonia, who lived through decades of Soviet occupation, understand in a profound way how wrong Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war in Ukraine is, how the world has to defend Ukraine's right to exist as a sovereign, democratic country, free to choose its own future.
All three Baltic states are anxious about Russia's intentions, two former Soviet bloc countries that are now allied to the West.
Well, let's now talk to Peter Dickinson, Ukrainian editor at the Atlantic Council and a regular contributor to our programme. Now, the last time we spoke to him was before the invasion. He was still in Kyiv. He joins us now from eastern Hungary to discuss the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Peter, good to see you. So we know that you are in eastern Ukraine. We know that you had to leave Ukraine. Can you tell us about your journey and how you got out?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Yeah, we left Kyiv the morning that the war began. My home is close to an airfield, an airbase that was struck in the first wave of the Russian airstrikes. So we were awoken, startled by Russian cruise missiles. The very unfamiliar but terrifying sound, and immediately recognized that there was something extremely grave taking place, a worst case scenario, as it were. So we immediately got up and began packing up. We already had some things ready. We were aware of the threat that had been looming for the previous weeks, and we were on the road within a matter of hours. The roads were extremely congested. We made our way very slowly via back roads to Western Ukraine, to the relative safety of West Ukraine. And initially we stayed in the Carpathian Mountains for just over a week, which is probably about as safe as you can get in Ukraine at the moment, up in the mountains in a hotel resort. And then a few days ago we crossed into Hungary, where we've been welcomed, and the Hungarians have been extremely generous in their welcome to all people coming from Ukraine.
2 million Ukrainians have now fled their own country, and more, of course, could follow. Now, President Zelensky, he keeps repeating calls for a no-fly zone. It's something that allies are yet to agree to. It's something that they don't want to agree to. Could a limited no-fly zone to protect civilians perhaps be an option?
Yes, certainly. I think that's the full-scale no-fly zone, so to speak, is really very, very problematic for NATO members, because it would put them in a direct confrontation potentially with Russia. They would effectively have to police the air over Ukraine, and they would have to prevent Russia from flying, and they would have to do that physically. So it would raise the potential and perhaps almost inevitably lead to military clashes in the air between Russia and NATO, which nobody wants, frankly. So I think the most realistic options at this stage are some sort of a limited no-fly zone over Western Ukraine, which is up to date, almost untouched by the conflict, and could potentially be imposed. And also a great strengthening of Ukraine's own air defense system, so that Ukraine itself can impose a form of no-fly zone, or at least can make it much more difficult than it currently is for Russia to dominate the skies and to carry out indiscriminate bombing, which Russia is currently doing.
They come with signs, offering goods and spare places in their vehicles. It's a multitude of foreign volunteers who have driven for hours to support Ukrainian refugees. We even came across a bus from Italy in the parking of the main Polish bus hub close to the border. These volunteers drove all the way from southern Italy with the aim of bringing back around 40 refugees.
In Italy, there are about 8,000 municipalities. If only 50% of them decide to organise a trip by bus, they will be able to bring back 200,000 people from there.
Alexandra is among the passengers heading to Italy. She left the city of Kharkiv under the bombings with her one-month-old child.
We decided to go because it was not safe for my daughter and for my parents and for me to stay there. And my husband, he stays there. He decided to stay. And so I hope that we will return in a few months, because we really miss him and we want to come back to Ukraine.
It's absolutely impossible to know how many people have turned out from all over Europe to help Ukrainian refugees at the Polish border. One thing is for sure, private initiative is showing the power of solidarity. Norbert has spent a day traveling from Stuttgart. He didn't even have enough room to bring all the goods his friends gathered for the refugees.
A little bit more difficult was the fact that we wanted to bring people back. Where should we put them, I asked. Who could take them in? And suddenly I have 5 addresses. We'll take someone, even dogs and cats.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Elisabetta has found a ride for a whole family on a convoy of 3 vans from Germany.
Our men in army, and we must go to the Poland and Germany, because in Kiev, in Ukraine, it's so big problem. Putin killed our people, killed children, so many children.
1.2 million Ukrainian refugees have crossed the border into Poland in the first 12 days of war. For most of them, it's the first safe stopover before continuing their journeys.
At Midday, Poland's main border crossing with Ukraine, a group of exhausted refugees who finally made it to safety. Just in the past week, Poland's received over 1 million, and since the war broke out, 2 million have fled Ukraine. On Wednesday, the head of the UN's refugee agency described it as a massive flow of people.
Hardly ever I have seen such massive, and in particular such rapid outflow of people. The response is good. Most of those coming out, you know that already, I'm sure, are women and children, because men are conscripted in the army and cannot leave. It's a group that has many vulnerabilities, especially in a situation of sudden flights.
The UN says that whilst the first waves of refugees had family and friends to link up with and support them in Poland, it's likely that later waves will be less supported and more desperate.
Over 100 years ago, the legendary ship Endurance sunk off the coast of Antarctica. It was then thought to be lost forever, until its discovery was announced on Wednesday.